Hello everyone, and I hope you are having a fantastic day so far. I am Arcblight, and in this video I want to talk about New World and what my impressions are so far since playing the recent beta. I think the game is good, but do I think the game is ready for a full release? Well, let's talk about it. So I played the previous beta and then the most recent beta, so I have first-hand experience on the changes that they've made and the content that was added. I did not make it to max level though, so keep that in mind as I discuss my opinions here. There could be additional content that I haven't fully experienced myself, but I have done research on all of the endgame that was currently available. So starting off in New World, I noticed the create a character has been a bit more in depth, which is definitely nice. Not as in depth as some MMOs out there, but enough to feel good, and I had no real complaints with how my character turned out. The overall graphics for New World are extremely well done, and the world around you looks fantastic as you're playing the game. It needs to be better optimized though, and there were some alleged rumors of graphics cards overheating and having some issues while people were playing. I did not have these issues myself, but regardless, this is an issue that they absolutely need to be resolved for its launch. The combat for the game has been improved since the previous beta, massively improved in my opinion. Before you could only have 3 different weapons equipped, but cooldowns were shared across all of your weapons. So using one skill on a sword would also have that specific skill slot on the cooldown, even if you swap to the hatchet or some other weapon. This limited combat quite a bit, and now that is better managed. Now you only have 2 weapons, but the cooldowns are not global and they stick to the specific skill that was used. Along with those improvements, they mellowed out the knockback and interrupts that the enemies would cause to you. Before, it was very easy to be overwhelmed by a few enemies that could constantly stagger you and put your skills on cooldown. There have also been new weapons added into the game, with the tank benefiting two-handed axe, the spellcasting ice gauntlet, and the multi-range spear. This adds more versatility to the build variations, and I'm definitely glad to see these additions. Even with the improvements to combat, however, I still have some slight complaints about it. It is pretty simple in terms of combos and skills, and I feel like there isn't much depth to how you build your character and how you play them. Not that this is terrible or anything, but it doesn't offer any interesting concepts that stand out from any other game, at least in my opinion. A lot of spamming attacks, casting a couple quick skills, and blocking or dodging. In my opinion, I feel like other combat games such as Black Desert Online or even Elder Scrolls Online offer better combat mechanics. I'm not saying New World should be exactly like any of those games, and I understand that the combat system feels a bit more realistic than these other fantasy games, but I don't look at any combat scenarios with wide eyes, and a combat trailer wouldn't be something that would compel me to play the game by itself based on its singular merits. But the game is still very addicting. With exploration and gathering materials for crafting, fighting enemies can still be very challenging depending on the level and the location that you're in. Plenty of players were absolutely hooked on the game and have put in many hours, even into a beta, which will wipe their progress at the end of it. So I think that speaks volumes by itself. The world in game both feels large and small. What I mean by this is that when you look at the overall world, it doesn't feel as large as other MMOs. There doesn't look to be, different countries, continents with drastically differing biomes or anything like that. Instead, you're on an island. But when you actually start to walk around, it starts to feel much larger, especially when you have to walk on foot from one area to the next. There is a fast travel system, but it is not as versatile as other games. You unlock a fast travel point when you make it to key areas or towns. You can set one town as your main inn, which it allows you to recall to from anywhere in the world with an hour-long cooldown. The fast traveling without recalling, you have to be in a town or a fast travel area to be able to fast travel somewhere else, which also costs Azoth to do. Azoth is an in-game material that you can acquire over time from questing and other activities. At first this can feel expensive to do, but quickly seems to be barely a second thought with how much Azoth you can start to acquire. The fast travel being limited like this still allows the game to feel large, though sometimes it can become a bit of a drag when you venture out, complete a few quests, and then you need to walk back to turn them in, at least if your recall isn't to that town, or perhaps if it's on cooldown. This has made me wish many times that there was a mount system in place, and makes me worry about possible monetization of traveling in the game from Amazon Game Studios in the future. I do, however, think that you can still try to plan ahead and make traveling as productive as possible, and I'm also aware that if we had mounts, then the world would probably feel much smaller in scale. but I still do think I would like to have a horse or something to travel around on. At least, that's just me. Probably the thing that I think is the most captivating about New World is the gathering and crafting system. It's easy to get caught up in the game while just cutting down trees, mining ore, and gathering herbs, then traveling to a town and using the crafting stations to make food, armor, and weapons. I could probably spend day after day just focusing on this and nothing else. It's calming, it feels productive, and with the leveling of all these skills, it feels like you're always making progress with something. All the way through the game, it can be absolutely beneficial to craft the best gear that you can, and even in the end game, this becomes a huge step in preparing yourself for the end expeditions and world events. While in the end game you can do activities that reward legendary gear, you still want to craft as much as you can to make yourself as well equipped as possible to even succeed in some of these activities to begin with. Or at the very least, you want to purchase crafted gears from other players on the auction house. I think they nailed the crafting system so far, but we will see how it goes once the game has been out for a while. I say this because anyone can get to a point where they're crafting really, really great gear, and then they can post it on the auction house. So eventually, this will become easily accessible to anyone with how many people are crafting, and might slow down the drive of anyone else putting effort into crafting themselves, but we will see how that plays out in the future. It might not go that way. New quests were added to the game as well, which breathes a little bit more life into the repetitive grind that New World questing has. In the previous beta, it felt like you were doing the same 5 quests over and over again, and while now there are definitely more options, over time it will still feel like a typical MMO grind. I'm glad there's new flavors of quests, but I also wish there was a little bit more in the variety. The faction quests are also improved in some ways, but they kind of feel just like another quest board for gathering items and killing enemies. This is good because it's actually rewarding. You get points every time you complete the faction thing, so you can buy some really, really good gear, so that adds a little bit more incentive to doing that. But I mean, at the end of it all, pretty much all questing in MMOs tend to eventually feel like this. One thing I will say is that with New World, I never felt like I was pushing a big storyline narrative. In other MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV, you see a grand story unfolding before you as you progress further and further, and while not everyone really cares about this and a lot of people will skip the dialogue, I still feel like New World has no overarching direction in where we're pushing. I never felt like there was this big bad guy that I was emotionally invested in taking down. There were no story points of betrayal or impending destruction. This might be something that you're okay with, but for me, it made me feel like I simply existed on this island and I had no major goals besides leveling and getting better gear. I didn't always feel this way, but every now and then I definitely stopped and thought about it. Expeditions were also added to the game as well, which are New World's versions of dungeons. There are 6 currently, and I had a chance of running one of them. I watched other people running the other dungeons, and overall, I feel like these are a fantastic addition to the game. They felt long enough to run through and enjoy, and the bosses were even really cool to fight. My only worry is the longevity of 6 expeditions, and if people will get bored of them or run out of reasons to run them. It makes me think of other MMOs that have significantly more than 6 and can also include large-scale raids. World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV both had numerous dungeons that were really well designed and contained even more in-depth boss fights than New World does, and even the mechanics were much more in-depth. But if you limited me to only playing 6 of them, I would tire of them regardless of how well they were made. So we'll have to see how these feel long term and how they blend into the other endgame activities, because as long as you have other things to do, you won't worry about grinding the same expeditions over and over and over. So with the expeditions, you run them with 5 players having a tank, a healer, and 3 DPS. There's no matchmaking in the game, so you will need to join friends or join people that are advertising that they need players, or you can advertise yourself. You will unlock access to expeditions as you progress in the main story, and then you will need to craft orbs to use as keys to enter these expeditions. I usually prefer MMOs to have matchmaking systems in them, but I know a lot of other people dislike them, hence World of Warcraft Classic being so popular. I still enjoyed the expedition, and I had minimal issues getting a group together, so that wasn't really a big problem, but we'll see how it goes in the future. Maybe there won't be a lot of people advertising for this, and maybe it'll become a little bit more difficult. And making the keys for these aren't too difficult either, but they require you to focus on gathering the materials needed to do so. I'm still not sure how I feel about that aspect, where I am used to entering dungeons on a whim, but gathering and crafting the orbs can also give a feeling of accomplishment, so I will just have to see how hard it becomes with later expeditions and see how I feel after that. PvP is a major component to New World, especially where it was initially designed to focus around this. With 3 different factions fighting for control over the towns, this adds a lot of hype to scheduled raids on other factions' towns. People signing up for these battles is exciting to see, and being involved or simply witnessing the battles can be very exciting all in themselves. I like how the controlling faction gets to determine the taxations on trading and crafting, because these help people determine what town to go to do all of their buying and selling or crafting in. This also lends more to inspiring takeovers from other factions as well. Endgame also has a PvPvE mode with the Outpost Rush. It's a coordinated 20 vs 20 battle where you will capture objectives, gather resources, and defeat enemies. You can upgrade your outposts with materials gathered and use them to help defend against opposing forces. Creating turrets, cannons, and respawn points allows for progressive battling in very strategic ways. You can summon creatures to help your team in the fights, and even a boss can rise, which if defeated can grant a great buff and even freeze your enemy team's progress to help you catch up or push further ahead of them. Victory grants many rewards as well, scaling off of how successful you are in the overall battle. Overall, I think New World is going really well, and it is very visually appealing. Combat is slightly lacking, but is good enough to enjoy overall, and I definitely haven't mentioned every single thing that New World offers, but my goal here was just to give a general overview and my thoughts on the game so far. I personally think New World could use some further development, and I don't see it as completely fleshed out as an MMO. But even with that in mind, I still fully plan to play New World on its release, and will absolutely push to the end game to accomplish everything it has to offer. Then after doing all of that, I'll make an even more thorough review, and will truly know if this game is great for a long-term MMO, or if it will eventually feel really stale and require further updates. I still think it feels half done in comparison to other MMOs, but all of these games had to start somewhere, and then they had a lot of content added to them as well. So with time, maybe New World is going to feel absolutely amazing, but time will tell. So I will sharpen up my hatchet, I will stand side by side with my fellow marauders and see how it all unfolds. And as always everyone, thanks for watching.